We are on day 33 of the search for Nancy Guthrie, and I want to lead with the most important piece of information I have for you today before we get into anything else, because this is the kind of news that stops you cold. Law enforcement sources with direct knowledge of this investigation have confirmed that the Pima County Sheriff's Department enlisted one of its partner agencies, gave them the signal sniffer, and sent them into the desert of a neighboring county with one specific directive: go to these coordinates and look for a body. That is not a rescue mission, that is a recovery operation. And while that search did not yield Nancy Guthrie, the fact that investigators had enough intelligence to send a team with specific cell tower coordinates into a desert in a county outside of Pima tells us something enormous about the state of this case that we need to sit with for a moment before we move on. My name is not important right now. What's important is Nancy Guthrie, and what's important is that you understand exactly where this investigation stands as of today, Thursday, March 5th, 2026. Because there is a lot of noise out there, a lot of speculation, a lot of theories that have been spreading across social media for weeks, and the job here is to cut through all of that and give you only what is documented, only what is confirmed, only what is real. So let's do exactly that. Nancy Ellen Guthrie is 84 years old. She is the mother of Savannah Guthrie, co-host of NBC's Today Show. She is the mother of Annie Guthrie, who lives in the Tucson area with her husband Tommaso Cioni and their family. She is a woman who has lived in and around Tucson, Arizona for more than 5 decades. She was known to her neighbors, known to her church community, known to the people who saw her regularly in the Catalina foothills area where she made her home. She was a woman with a routine. She was a woman with deep roots, and she was a woman living alone in a quiet, affluent, low-crime neighborhood when someone came to her door in the middle of the night on February 1st, 2026, and took her. The Pima County Sheriff's Department has been clear about this from the beginning. Nancy Guthrie did not leave on her own. She was taken against her will. That is the foundation of this entire investigation, and everything we are going to talk about today builds on top of that established fact. The last evening of Nancy Guthrie's confirmed normal life began on January 31st. She spent time with family that evening. Her son-in-law Tommaso Cioni, Annie's husband, dropped her off at her home. The garage door was recorded closing. She was home. And then at 1:47 in the morning on February 1st, her video doorbell was disconnected. Not because of a power outage, not because of a technical glitch. It was physically tampered with by the person who was standing at her front door. At 2:12 a.m., motion was captured on the back-end system of her Nest camera, footage that was later recovered by the FBI and Pima County Sheriff working with private sector partners because the physical device had been tampered with and the local recording had been compromised. What that recovered footage showed is what the entire country has been looking at since FBI Director Kash Patel released it publicly on February 10th, 9 days after Nancy was reported missing. A masked individual, armed, wearing gloves, carrying what has been identified as a 25-liter Ozark Trail hiker pack backpack, standing at her front door. The suspect appears to have a flashlight in his mouth and a gun in a front holster. He is seen placing a gloved hand over the camera lens and then using a nearby shrub to further conceal the device. The FBI has described this individual as a man standing between 5'9" and 5 feet 10 inches tall with an average build. At 2:28 a.m., the app connected to Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker showed that her device had been disconnected from her iPhone. That is the moment. That 2:28 a.m. timestamp is the pivot point around which this entire investigation turns. It is the moment that investigators believe Nancy Guthrie was physically separated from her home and from the devices that were tracking her health. And here is where the technology that has defined so much of this case becomes critical to understand. Because if you have not been following this closely, the concept of the signal sniffer is going to be new to you, and it is important. Nancy Guthrie has a pacemaker. That pacemaker is a medical device equipped with Bluetooth low-energy technology. What that means in practical terms, as explained by David Kennedy, a former NSA hacker and the inventor of the signal sniffer technology being used in this investigation, is that the pacemaker is designed to run for multiple years on minimal power. It operates by continuously sending out what are called advertisements, tiny electronic broadcasts, looking to connect with the paired devices it knows, in Nancy's case, the devices on her iPhone, and the app she uses to monitor her pacemaker health. When Nancy was taken, her pacemaker was physically separated from those devices, but the pacemaker did not stop broadcasting. It has been broadcasting continuously since February 1st, sending out a signal that says essentially, "I am here, I am looking for my devices, where are you?" And the signal sniffer is the technology designed to answer that call. The signal sniffer, deployed from a helicopter, sends out what is effectively a handshake looking for that specific pacemaker's unique Bluetooth address. When the sniffer and the pacemaker communicate, the technology can pinpoint the location of the device. This is not theoretical. This is documented technology that has been operational in this investigation since mid-February. Footage captured by NewsNation's Brian Entin during a live report showed a helicopter operating above the Catalina foothills area, and it was later confirmed that the helicopter was using signal sniffer technology in the search for Nancy Guthrie. For anyone wondering whether the pacemaker could simply have died, the answer, according to the engineers and manufacturers of both the signal sniffer and the pacemaker technology itself, is no. The pacemaker is an electronic device, and it will continue sending its signal for years. The battery in these devices is designed for exactly that kind of longevity. Which means that wherever Nancy Guthrie is right now, her pacemaker is still out there, still broadcasting, still looking for her phone. What my law enforcement source confirmed to me, and what makes this development so significant, is that the search using the signal sniffer was not limited to Pima County. Pima County itself is an enormous piece of geography. It covers an area roughly equal to the combined size of the states of Rhode Island and Connecticut. It is vast, and it is mostly desert. And yet, investigators did not stay within its borders. They gave a partner agency specific cell tower coordinates derived from cell phone tower data, and they sent that agency into the desert of a neighboring county with the signal sniffer and with a specific directive. That directive, according to my source, was to go to that location and look for a body. The search did not find Nancy. But the fact that cell tower data led investigators to a specific location outside of Pima County, specific enough to send a team with coordinates in hand rather than conducting a general grid search, tells us that there is intelligence in this case that has not been made public. Someone's cell phone or someone's device pinged a cell tower in a neighboring county at a time and in a location that was significant enough for the Pima County Sheriff's Department to authorize a search. That is a substantial piece of investigative activity, and the timing of it, occurring just one day after news broke that the signal sniffer was being used in Pima County itself, suggests a rapid escalation in the intelligence picture. Now I want to be precise about something, because it matters. The Pima County Sheriff's Department has also publicly clarified, and this is important for people who have been following the social media speculation around the doorbell camera images, that claims suggesting the masked suspect appeared at Nancy Guthrie's door on multiple separate days are, in the words of the sheriff, purely speculative. The sheriff's office stated directly that while the surveillance images show the suspect in various stages of attire, there are no date or timestamps embedded in the recovered footage that conclusively prove the individual visited the property on more than one occasion. I want to be fair to viewers and to the record here, because there has been a significant amount of online discussion treating those appearances as definitively occurring on 2 separate days, and the official position of the Pima County Sheriff's Department, as of this recording, is that that conclusion is not supported by the available evidence. That matters for the overall picture of who this person is and what his intent was. What the investigation has confirmed through forensic and digital evidence is this: a masked, armed individual was at Nancy Guthrie's front door in the early hours of February 1st, 2026. Nancy's pacemaker disconnected from her iPhone at 2:28 a.m. Blood was found inside Nancy Guthrie's home. Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos has confirmed that DNA taken from inside the home contains genetic material from more than one person, meaning it is what forensic scientists call a mixed sample, and his office has stated publicly that the private laboratory in Florida being used to analyze that DNA is facing challenges due to the commingling of the genetic material. That mixed DNA profile does not yet point investigators to a confirmed suspect, and the forensic work on it continues. There has also been significant attention paid to a glove found approximately 2.5 miles from Nancy Guthrie's home. The FBI confirmed publicly last month that one of the recovered gloves with a DNA profile appears to match the gloves worn by the subject in the surveillance video. Investigators initially ran that DNA through CODIS, the national database for DNA from criminal offenders, and got no hit. The sample then underwent additional genealogical DNA testing. As of today, March 5th, Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos has confirmed that the DNA found on that glove was traced back to a restaurant employee who works in the area near Nancy Guthrie's home and who is unrelated to her disappearance and abduction. That is a dead end for that particular piece of evidence, but it is a confirmed dead end, which is different from an unresolved one. Other gloves that have been recovered are still being tested at the private laboratory in Florida, and those results have not yet been released. On Tuesday, March 3rd, a volunteer using a metal detector was seen scanning the roadside easement directly outside Nancy Guthrie's home, looking for small items that may have been dropped during the abduction. The search did not yield anything of apparent evidentiary value. Also on Tuesday, a spokesperson for the Pima County Sheriff's Department confirmed to Fox News Digital that the vehicle belonging to Annie Guthrie was in the process of being returned to the family. This matters because Annie's car had been seized under a warrant and held as part of the investigation. The return of that vehicle, like the earlier return of Luke Daley's silver Range Rover, suggests that those particular items have been processed and determined not to require continued retention for evidentiary purposes. The Sheriff's Office has consistently stated that Nancy's adult children and their spouses are not suspected of involvement in her disappearance. Luke Daley, who is 37 years old and lives approximately 2 miles from Nancy Guthrie's home, was detained and questioned in connection with this investigation on February 13th. His silver Range Rover was towed under a search warrant. His home was searched for approximately 6 hours, and he was held for questioning for what he describes as 4 to 5 hours before being released without charges. His mother, Mary Chapman Daley, was detained separately, and her home was also searched for approximately 6 hours while she sat in a law enforcement vehicle outside. Luke Daley has publicly and categorically denied any involvement in Nancy Guthrie's disappearance. His Range Rover was subsequently processed and returned to him. His cell phone was taken and has not yet been returned at the time of his public interview, and he has stated that he was never told the specific reason for his detention beyond investigators eventually confirming it was related to the Guthrie case. He has not been named a suspect by the Pima County Sheriff's Department. On Monday, March 2nd, which was day 30 of the search, Savannah Guthrie and her sister Annie, along with Annie's husband Tommaso Cioni, came down the driveway of Nancy Guthrie's home and approached the makeshift memorial that has been growing at the entrance to the property near the mailbox. The family brought yellow flowers and left a card. Savannah Guthrie's sister Annie was visibly and audibly distressed. The card read in full, "Mama, we miss you so much. Our hearts are broken. We are standing on ash, on scorched earth. But Mum, though we are surrounded by so much darkness and uncertainty, our love burns bright. We love you, Mummy. We miss you so much." Our best friend Annie, Tommaso and Olmo. Only Fox News and News Nation were present to capture that moment because the Pima County Sheriff's Department implemented extraordinary parking restrictions in the blocks surrounding Nancy Guthrie's home that have made sustained media presence in that neighborhood extremely physically demanding, particularly in the desert heat. Savannah Guthrie posted on Instagram the same day, writing, "We feel the love and prayers from our neighbors, from the Tucson community, and from around the country. Please don't stop praying and hoping with us. her family has offered a reward of up to $1 million for information leading to Nancy's recovery, a reward Savannah has confirmed can be paid in cash and can be given to someone who provides tips anonymously. As of this week, the case has been handed off to a dedicated task force composed of Pima County homicide detectives and FBI agents. The Pima County Sheriff's Department issued a public statement confirming it is refocusing resources to detectives specifically assigned to this case, and that resource allocation may fluctuate as leads are developed and resolved. The department also confirmed it will maintain a patrol presence in the Guthrie neighborhood. Fox News has separately reported that some FBI operations have been moved back to the FBI's Phoenix headquarters, though FBI personnel remain on the ground in Tucson. The initial investigative response to this case involved as many as 400 federal agents working in and around Tucson. A drawdown at this stage of an investigation, lasting more than 30 days, is standard and expected. But the transition to a dedicated task force structure, with homicide detectives specifically named as part of that unit, tells us something about the direction investigators believe this case is heading. The sheriff, Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos, told NBC News in an interview as of this week that investigators are, quote, definitely closer to identifying a suspect or suspects in Nancy Guthrie's disappearance. That statement came as investigators were confirming they are still actively reviewing video of a vehicle captured on a Ring camera belonging to a neighbor approximately 2.5 miles from Nancy Guthrie's home. That footage was captured at 2:36 a.m. on February 1st, which is 8 minutes after Nancy's pacemaker disconnected from her iPhone, and the 2.5-mile distance represents approximately a 7 to 8 minute drive from the Guthrie property. Fox News reporter Michael Ruiz, who has been one of the most consistently present journalists at this story from the ground in Tucson, confirmed this week that investigators are still actively looking into that Ring camera footage. The vehicle has not yet been publicly identified, and law enforcement has not issued a be-on-the-lookout alert for any specific vehicle in connection with this case. The investigation has also received more than 40,000 tips through the FBI's hotline and the Pima County Sheriff's Department's digital tip line. Investigators are still working through thousands of hours of surveillance video. Ring's founder and CEO Jamie Siminoff publicly commented this week that he believes the Nancy Guthrie case would likely already be solved if more cameras had been present at her home, saying, quote, the video that they have appears to be the best evidence they have of what happened, and noting that additional coverage would have, in his view, changed the outcome of the investigations early stages significantly. There have also been multiple ransom demands received in connection with this case, including one described by TMZ as highly sophisticated, involving a demand for a sum similar to a previously reported $6 million figure, denominated in a cryptocurrency other than Bitcoin, and containing what TMZ described as graphic descriptions of the consequences if the demand is not met. TMZ reported forwarding that demand to the FBI. Law enforcement has not publicly confirmed the authenticity of any ransom demand in this case, and the family's reward for information leading to Nancy's recovery remains separate from and unconnected to those communications. What doctor? Tracy Sergeant, a forensic search expert and PhD in psychology, who has worked between 2,000 and 3,000 missing persons cases over the course of her career, has explained about the strategic framework of a search like this is essential context for understanding what investigators are facing. Dr. Sergeant, whose organization Forensic Investigations and Analysis deploys cadaver dogs, trained as human remains detection animals, and applies offender psychology to search methodology, has outlined the parallel nature of what investigators must now be doing. On one track, the search for Nancy alive continues. You start at ground zero, meaning the last confirmed location of the missing person, which is her home, and you work outward from there. You use every piece of technology available, including the signal sniffer, drones, ground searchers, cell tower data, and you focus resources on what she calls high-probability areas. High-probability areas are locations identified by physical evidence, technological data, or investigative intelligence as likely connected to the disappearance. The cell tower coordinates that sent investigators into the desert of a neighboring county constitute exactly that kind of high-probability designation. On the parallel track which Dr. Sergeant confirmed is now the appropriate investigative framework given the timeline, and Nancy's age and medical circumstances, investigators must consider recovery. That means cadaver dogs, which can detect the scent of human remains from decades ago and across enormous distances, deployed under optimal conditions, which in the Arizona desert means nighttime operations when the heat of the day is not dissipating scent. It means divers and sonar if there are bodies of water within the search radius. It means metal detectors to locate the pacemaker if above-ground signal sniffer technology has not been sufficient. Dr. Sergeant has also emphasized that the Arizona desert presents unique challenges for concealment detection. In wooded environments, disturbed ground stands out against the natural landscape. In shifting desert sands, wind can conceal disturbance almost immediately. That environmental reality makes the pacemaker signal a potentially critical asset in ways that would not exist in a forest search or an urban investigation. The psychological framework that Dr. Sergeant applies to the offender in a case like this centers entirely on motive. The home was targeted. The perpetrator came prepared, armed, gloved, with a specific backpack, with the foreknowledge or the intent to disable the surveillance equipment at the entry point. Whether or not that individual expected Nancy to be home that night remains an open question, but the preparation involved in what is captured on that surveillance footage argues against this being a random or opportunistic event. From an offender psychology standpoint, Dr. Sergeant has noted that most perpetrators in targeted residential crimes live within the surrounding area. The logistics of reconnaissance, even the logistics of what happened that night, strongly argue against someone who drove 2 or more hours to commit this crime and then drove 2 or more hours back. Nighttime behavior, Dr. Sergeant has also noted, tends to compress perceived distance. People who commit crimes in the dark routinely believe they have traveled much farther from a road or entry point than they actually have. That means that in searches where a perpetrator is believed to have acted at night, investigators consistently find evidence much closer to access roads and vehicle drop-off points than initial assumptions might suggest. And in the Arizona desert specifically, that principle becomes even more operationally significant because the terrain itself imposes physical constraints on what any individual can realistically accomplish in the dark, on foot, carrying weight, under pressure, with limited visibility and an acute awareness that every additional minute spent in that environment increases the risk of exposure. Think about what carrying another person in the desert at night actually requires. Dr. Sergeant made this point explicitly during her conversation about the logistics of body transport in a case like this, and it is worth dwelling on. Dead weight, whether the person is unconscious or deceased, is extraordinarily difficult to manage over any significant distance, regardless of the physical strength of the individual doing the carrying. You are not walking upright with a manageable load. You are managing irregular weight distribution, unstable terrain, darkness, and the kind of psychological pressure that comes from operating under acute fear of detection. The research on cases that Dr. Sergeant has worked and the broader forensic literature on this type of crime consistently shows that perpetrators do not carry victims as far as they believe they have. They park as close as they can get to their intended location. They move as short a distance as the cover requires, and when law enforcement finds the evidence in those cases, it is almost always much closer to the road than anyone initially estimated. In the Arizona desert, where even a short walk off a paved surface can put a person into genuinely difficult terrain with no landmarks, no light, and no reliable sense of direction, that tendency toward proximity becomes even more pronounced. There is also the question of what this perpetrator knew about the area and what that knowledge tells us about who he is and where he came from. The Catalina Foothills neighborhood is not easy to navigate if you do not know it. The roads are not laid out on a grid. The addresses are not sequential in an obvious way. The camera placement at Nancy Guthrie's home required specific knowledge of the property to defeat as methodically as this individual appeared to. The choice of access route, the choice of timing, the awareness of which cameras needed to be disabled, the preparation with gloves and a mask and a specific backpack and what appears to be a weapon, all of these elements speak to someone who had done work on this target before the night of February 1st. Whether that work involved physically visiting the property on a prior occasion, or whether it was conducted through other means, aerial imagery, publicly available property records, observation from a distance, is something that investigators are still working to establish. But the preparation is not in question. This was not impulsive. Someone decided to do this and they gave it deliberate thought before they acted. The cadaver dog methodology that Dr. Sergeant described is particularly important to understand in this specific environment because it pushes back against one of the more persistent pieces of misinformation that tends to circulate in cases like this, which is the idea that extended time elapsed since a crime means evidence cannot be recovered or detected. That is simply not what the science shows. Cadaver dogs, which are more accurately described as human remains detection dogs, because they are trained across the full spectrum of biological material from fresh blood to decades-old skeletal remains, do not operate on the same timeline as visual evidence. They work on scent, and the scent of human remains behaves differently in different environments, but in no environment does it simply disappear on a predictable schedule. Dr. Sergeant described working a cold case in Atlanta in which cadaver dogs located evidence in a garage 30 years after the confirmed death of the individual in question. The FBI has used human remains detection dogs in cases involving burial sites from the 19th century. The science here is not speculative. It is well documented and operationally validated across thousands of real-world applications. What this means for the Nancy Guthrie case is that wherever her remains may be, if the worst has happened, the biological evidence of her presence in that location is almost certainly still detectable. The desert environment actually offers one dimension of advantage in this regard. The aridity that makes surface visual detection difficult also tends to preserve biological material in ways that humid environments do not. The absence of moisture slows decomposition in ways that can preserve both the physical and olfactory evidence of human remains for extended periods. The question of nighttime versus daytime deployment of those dogs is also not a trivial one in this context. Heat, as Dr. Sergeant explained, is the enemy of scent for working dogs in the field. When temperatures rise into the 80s and 90s, as they do in Tucson even in March, the volatilization of organic compounds that dogs detect is accelerated, which paradoxically means the scent dissipates more quickly into the air rather than remaining concentrated near the source. At night, cooler temperatures slow that process dramatically. Scent molecules settle closer to the ground. They concentrate in low-lying areas and against physical surfaces. The dogs can work more efficiently, more accurately, and for longer periods without the physiological stress that extreme heat imposes. If cadaver dogs are being deployed in this investigation, and there is no reason to believe they have not been given the resources that have been brought to bear on this case, the most operationally effective deployments would be happening after dark, in the areas identified through cell tower coordinates and signal sniffer activity, by handlers who understand how to read the terrain in that specific desert environment. There is one more dimension of this investigation that deserves serious attention, and that is the question of what happens next from a prosecutorial standpoint. Because even as we are talking about the search for Nancy Guthrie, even as we are hoping for a resolution that allows her to come home, there is a parallel legal architecture being constructed by the investigators and prosecutors who are working this case, and the decisions being made right now about how evidence is collected, how it is documented, how it is handled, and how it is interpreted, will determine whether the person who did this is ever held accountable in a court of law. This is not a trivial consideration. It is, in fact, one of the most important structural realities of any major criminal investigation, and it is why the Pima County Sheriff's Department and the FBI have both been deliberate sometimes frustratingly so from a media perspective, about what they say publicly and what they choose to keep inside the investigation. The issue of chain of custody, which Dr. Sergeant raised in the context of civilian search efforts and the backpack found in a drainage culvert near the Guthrie property, is not bureaucratic formality. It is the legal framework that determines whether physical evidence can be admitted in court, and it is also the framework that determines whether that evidence can withstand the scrutiny of defense attorneys whose entire professional purpose will be to find any procedural irregularity that creates reasonable doubt. When a civilian picks up a backpack from a drainage culvert with good intentions and the most genuine desire to help, that item has been handled in a way that breaks the chain of custody. It cannot be presented in court with the same evidentiary weight it would have had if law enforcement had located it, photographed it in situ, documented its condition and location, and collected it according to the protocols that govern forensic evidence collection. That does not mean it is worthless to investigators. It may provide leads. It may point in a direction that yields other admissible evidence, but the item itself, as a piece of courtroom evidence, has been compromised. Every criminal case that has collapsed at trial because of an evidence handling failure represents a version of this same problem, and the investigators working the Nancy Guthrie case are acutely aware of it. The sealed warrants that have been a consistent feature of this investigation, the warrant for Annie Guthrie's vehicle, the warrant for Luke Daley's Range Rover, the warrant for the Daley home search, are sealed for reasons that are not arbitrary. Judges seal warrants in active investigations when disclosure of the warrant's contents would reveal the investigative strategy, identify confidential informants or sources, alert potential suspects to the direction of the investigation, or compromise evidence that has not yet been secured. The fact that multiple warrants in this case have been sealed, and that efforts by media organizations, including Megyn Kelly's team, to obtain copies of those documents have been denied, tells us that the investigation has strategic elements that law enforcement is actively protecting. That is not cover-up. That is standard prosecutorial practice in a complex case where the goal is not just to find Nancy Guthrie, but to build a case that can put the person responsible in prison for the rest of their life. The genetic genealogy dimension of this case is potentially the most important long-term investigative tool available to the authorities, and it is worth explaining in some detail because it is frequently misunderstood by the general public. Standard forensic DNA analysis works by comparing a DNA profile extracted from evidence against profiles stored in CODIS, the National Criminal Offender Database. If the person whose DNA was found is not in CODIS, you get no match, and the DNA analysis hits a wall. That is what happened with the DNA from the glove that was traced to the restaurant employee. That particular sample was in the database because of unrelated reasons, and it produced a match that cleared that individual. But for DNA samples that do not produce a CODIS hit, investigators now have access to genealogical DNA databases, most significantly GED Match and Family Tree DNA, which contain millions of profiles uploaded voluntarily by people tracing their family ancestry. The forensic technique involves uploading the crime scene DNA profile and searching for partial matches. Not a direct match to the individual, but matches to people who share segments of DNA with the unknown contributor, meaning relatives. From those partial matches, genealogists working with investigators build family trees, identifying the relatives of the unknown individual and working backward through the family tree to identify who, at the right age and in the right location, could be the source of the original crime scene sample. This is the technique that identified Joseph James DeAngelo, the Golden State Killer, in 2018 after 40 years of unsolved crimes. It identified him not because his DNA was in any criminal database, but because a distant relative had uploaded their DNA to a genealogy website. The science has since been refined, and the databases have grown substantially. If the perpetrator of Nancy Guthrie's abduction touched anything in or around that home, if he left any biological material anywhere in the evidence chain that investigators have been able to collect, Genealogical DNA analysis represents a path to identification that does not depend on the perpetrator ever having been arrested or convicted of anything in his life. We are on day 33. No arrest has been made, no suspect has been publicly named. Nancy Guthrie has not been found. The investigation is active, the task force is working, the pacemaker is still transmitting, and 40,000 plus tips are still being processed by human investigators who are going through each one because that is what this case requires. If you know anything, if you saw something on the morning of February 1st that did not feel right, if someone in your life behaved strangely in the days before or after that date, if you think you may have seen something on a road in the Tucson area or in a neighboring county in the hours after 2:28 a.m. on February 1st, 2026, contact the FBI at 1-800-CALL-FBI. You can submit a tip anonymously. The reward is up to $1 million, and it can be paid in cash. If you have information, that information could be the thing that brings Nancy Guthrie home. Subscribe to Crime Blackline Archive and stay with us as this investigation continues, because this case is not over, and we are not going anywhere until there are answers.